environmental engineer at Ocean Project, adjunct lecturer at Griffith University, and has over 20 years experience as an environmental engineer. So welcome Brad to the stage.
Thanks everyone for coming along today, much appreciated. Righto. The world is on fire, from Australia to the Amazon, from Pakistan to the Siberian Arctic. The hour is late, and the moment of consequence, so long delayed, is upon us. Like Mackenzie indicated, the planet and humankind are facing unprecedented and mutually reinforcing challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the overuse of natural resources. Do we watch the world burn? Or do we choose to do what is necessary to achieve a different future? Who we understand ourselves to be determines the choices that we make. The choices that we make determine the future for us all. The choices are both simple and complex, but above all, they are absolutely urgent. If we cast our minds back to moments of great consequence, we naturally think that if we were in those tartans with our face painted blue, we would have made the noble choices too. We would have done what is necessary instead of stumbling along, head down, and doing nothing. Well, this is our chance. We have the outrageous fortune to be on this planet in this moment of time, facing possibly the greatest challenge that the human race has ever faced. So what can we do? Well, one thing we can't do is to indulge in the feeling of powerlessness, to do the status quo. We have to change. Like Mackenzie indicated, we are facing unprecedented challenges, and it's up to us to make change. We cannot rely on governments or businesses or technologies or just someone else to solve this problem. It is an everyone, everywhere mission, and it is up to all of us to individually and collectively act. But what should we do? Well, I'm thankful that I'm at the Brisbane Vegan Expo because, and I'm just quoting here Professor Joseph Paul, a vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth. Now, for those who aren't familiar with this professor or his study, he led a team over 4 years looking at a whole bunch of farming systems over 120 countries, looking at basically 90% of the food production system, and he came to that conclusion. And in the course of that 4-year study, he actually decided to go vegan himself. But look, it should come as no surprise. This has been well known for a very long time, and it's not just the tree-hugging hippies of the world that are telling you this for the last 10 or so years. This is a quote from the United Nations. This is coming out of their Food and Agriculture Organisation report. And you can see here, the livestock sector emerges as one of the top 2 or 3 most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. So how is this the case? So I'm going to give you guys a 101 as to how a shift towards a more plant-rich diet is best for the planet and ultimately us. First up, let's talk about deforestation. Fundamentally, there's just a lot of livestock. 60% of all mammals on the planet are cows, sheep, pigs, etc. A lot more than humans, and only 4% of all mammals on the planet are wild. Clearly that is not an appropriate balance. Look at birds. 70% of all birds on the planet are poultry, chickens, turkeys, etc. Clearly that is not sustainable. And it's inefficient. The animal agriculture industry is just blatantly inefficient. So more than 80% of all farmland goes to livestock, and they only produce about 18% of all food calories and about 37% of all protein. And you've probably seen a graph like this before. Land use per 100 grams of protein. It should come as no surprise that the most land-intensive products, even if you look at protein as your metric, livestock just needs a hell of a lot more land relative to, say, plant-based options. You know, you can see lamb and mutton on the top, beef second bottom. Down the bottom you've got peas and nuts and etc. Livestock is very land-intensive and it's very inefficient. And it's not just an issue in Brazil or China or Indonesia. Australia has the second highest rate of deforestation out of any country on the world. And why are we clearing that land? The main cause of this clearing is to make room for livestock. We are currently living in the greatest mass extinction in 65 million years. 1 in 3 mammal extinctions over the last 400 years happened in Australia. And in Australia, something like 30% of all non-bat mammal species are still threatened with extinction, including our iconic koalas. Ultimately, animal agriculture is the leading cause of biodiversity loss and species loss, both globally and in Australia. When we clear land, when we clear forests to make room for livestock, these animals just don't disappear and go somewhere else and live happily ever after. They die. When we clear land for livestock, wildlife dies. And in Queensland is the worst state in Australia for deforestation. We clear about 1,500 football fields every day. And as a result, in Queensland, that kills about 45 million animals. It's really unsustainable. Doesn't have to be that way. Livestock needs a lot of land, but it also needs a lot of water. And again, similar graph to what I showed before. The water requirement for animal products is way higher than plant-based products. You know, we're a land of droughts and flooding rains, but we use water so inefficiently. You can see here the top offenders. Cheese, you need about 5,600 litres of water to make a kilo of cheese. Relative to, say, I don't know, bananas. You need about 115 litres of water to make a kilo of bananas. Now, I live around the corner in a little workers' cottage in Spring Hill. I've got 3 big bunches of bananas just about to bloom, and all I do is give a little bit of drip irrigation. I grow bananas, mulberries, veggies, Panama berries, etc. Lots of stuff. I've got no room for a cow. And I haven't got the water. Animal agriculture uses a lot of water, but it pollutes a lot of water as well. And the livestock deck, again, this is straight out of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organisation. And if anyone wants to criticise any of the things I'm saying, everything is fully referenced. I'll provide full references to all of these if anyone wants to argue with them later on. The livestock sector is probably the largest sectoral source of water pollution. And there's probably 2 key reasons for that. You've got diffuse pollution and you've got point source pollution. So diffuse pollution is what comes from the land. Particularly given that when we clear land or clear forests, vegetation, etc., when it rains, we produce a lot more runoff, a lot less infiltration, a lot less evapotranspiration. That increased volume and frequency of flow carries a lot more pollution into our downstream environment. Then you've got cows going into first and second order waterways, trampling creeks and riverbeds, etc., exacerbating those erosion issues as well. And then you've got point source issues. So when I talk about point source, I'm talking about, often you have a sewage handling facility, a wastewater handling facility for slaughterhouses, chicken processing facilities. And it's not just an issue that you might hear about in the States with pig farms or whatever. I'll tell you about a project that I've worked on. It was I won't tell you exactly where it is, but it was a chicken processing facility in Brisbane. And they had these massive lagoons full of basically pure ammonia, chicken guts, excrement, and all manners of nasty stuff. And they used to put it in the lagoon and just spray it into the landscape. Right next door to residential areas, I should point out. Anyway, one of those lagoons sprung a leak. And that water, that pure ammonia from the chicken processing facility, drained into a local waterway, and it killed everything within the 17-kilometre stretch of that waterway. So everything in that creek, from fish to macroinvertebrates, dead as a result of just that one chicken processing facility in Brisbane. It's not just a problem that's happening somewhere else, it's happening in Australia as well. And talk about fisheries. A lot of people think fishes or seafood's environmentally friendly. Well, again, just using a report from the United Nations, these guys put out a report called the World Fisheries and Aquaculture every 2 years, giving a review of the status of the world's fish stocks. This is wild fish stocks as well. Long story short, about 30% of all fish stocks are already overfished, and pretty much the entire remainder is at its maximal sustainable limit. And it's worthwhile noting when commercial fishing occurs, these ships, these vessels, are basically just killing machines. They don't just target fish. It's reported that about up to 40% of all seafood caught is bycatch. So up to 40% of seafood caught isn't actually the target species. Now they try to often throw that away and sometimes survives, but generally it dies. And it's not just other fish. I'm talking about roughly, it's about 650,000 whales, dolphins and seals that are killed every year as bycatch. 650,000 whales, dolphins and seals every year. And then you've got about 50 million sharks a year killed as well. That is not sustainable. And the fishing methods, the deep sea trawls, etc., they don't just capture a whole bunch of dolphins and seals, etc. They often dig up the seafloor, which releases a whole bunch of carbon in the atmosphere and exacerbates global warming. It's crazy. Then I want to talk about aquaculture. So about half of all seafood is from aquaculture, the other half from wild caught species. This has some key problems, specifically pollution and food and energy usage. So fundamentally, I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen a sort of aquaculture farm in the deep sea, but they drop a whole bunch of food to the surface. Most of that actually sinks to the bottom. They also bathe the fish swimming around in like antibiotics and all sorts of nasty chemicals. That generally falls to the bottom as well. So everything underneath these aquaculture facilities is dead. Generally immediately below and within the immediate vicinity. And often these are in areas in pristine marine environments. It's unacceptable. And then you've got the inefficiency associated with aquaculture. So rough numbers. So if you're looking at just tuna, one of the most common aquaculture seafoods, you need about 9 kilos of fish meal to produce a kilo of tuna, and you need about 5 kilos of wild caught fish to make a kilo of fish meal. Simple maths, that means you need 45 kilos of fish to create 1 kilo of tuna. It's just inefficient. Now we'll talk about everyone's favourite topic, climate change. And if there's anyone who wants to debate as to whether climate change is real or whether it's exacerbated by anthropogenic sources, there's a great report put out by the CSIRO and the Bureau of Mineralogy, some fairly reputable scientific organisations. They put it out every 2 years. It's called State of the Climate, showing a whole bunch of historical climate data. And basically, long story short, it clearly shows that air temperatures, sea temperatures are increasing, and also our oceans are becoming more and more acidic, which is a big drama for a whole bunch of reasons. Again, similar graph to what I showed before. Animal agriculture produces a stack of greenhouse gases per unit of food product. Now, whether you're talking about protein or calorie, it doesn't matter. The worst offenders you can see, beef at the top, followed by lamb and mutton, prawns, cheese, pig meat, all the ones at the top. The ones at the bottom, the very bottom is nuts. Less beef, more nuts. It's pretty simple. But what about eating local? This is sometimes some advice you hear in various circles. It's often one of the most misguided pieces of advice. This would be actually very good advice if transportation was actually a key source of greenhouse gas emissions associated with our food. The reality is, it's actually only a very small proportion of the carbon footprint is actually transportation. If you look at beef, only about 0.5% of greenhouse gas emissions from beef is associated with transport. Lamb, it's about 2%. So, don't get me wrong, food miles and eating local are still very good ideas, but not at the expense of eating something that is still environmentally damaging. What about regenerative farming? And you've probably all seen Kiss the Ground. And for those who aren't familiar with regenerative farming, it's basically trying to capture more carbon in the soil. You know, take it from the atmosphere and bring it back into the soil. That's fantastic for soil health. And regenerative farming is definitely better than conventional farming practices. But from a climate change perspective, the numbers just don't add up. So to give you an idea, even using the best estimates, the most optimistic conservative estimates, the carbon sequestered in a regenerative farming practice that actually uses a holistic grazing methods only probably captures between 20 to 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are actually produced by the cows themselves. And again, if you look at, there's a great report put out by Paul Hawken called the Drawdown Report, which rates basically all the various options around climate change mitigation and carbon drawdown. Plant-based diets is number 4. Holistic grazing is like number 19. So plant-based eating is far more effective than regenerative farming practices that rely on holistic grazing practices. One thing that is still really important is making sure that we're not wasting food. It's something like about a third of all food that's produced isn't actually consumed. That is clearly out of whack. So whatever we can do in our day-to-day lives, even if you are eating a little bit of meat, making sure that you actually consume whatever you're buying is a very effective method. Ultimately, you can follow the money. And this is a graph by the Boston Consulting Group. They looked at basically bang for buck in terms of all the ways you can invest in green sort of innovations. The number 1 is investment in plant-based proteins. Something like, I think, 3 times more effective than green cement and about 11 more times effective than zero-emission carbs. So again, follow the money. And it should be no surprise that a lot of money by some very wealthy individuals is being invested into plant-based alternatives to meat and dairy. So whether that means like fermentation, cell-based meats, or just plant-based items. To give you an idea of the investment, globally, in 2019, $1 billion was invested in plant-based meat and dairy. 2 years later, $5 billion was invested. A 5-fold increase in just 2 years. That is impressive. So ultimately, my talk today is one of hope. Hope that you guys know that you can actually make a big difference in mitigating your own personal environmental footprint and ultimately helping us live more sustainably and for a lot longer period. There's no doubt that this really is a watershed moment in history. I love this quote, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. It's amazing, and it's probably never been easier. It's clear that a greater shift to a more plant-rich diet is absolutely vital if we are to live on this planet and enjoy this amazing environment. And it's never been easier to do so. There's no shortage of websites, apps, recipe books, whole bunch of stuff, vegan starter kits, to make the transition towards a more plant-rich diet so much more easily. And there's no shortage of people, in particularly elite athletes, who have time and time again show that a shift to a more plant-rich diet can make you actually not even survive, but actually thrive. And I'm talking tennis players, basketballers, footballers, ultra runners, UFC fighters, bodybuilders, and strongman competitors. I don't belittle the fact that a greater shift towards a plant-based diet can be daunting and uncomfortable and inconvenient. But unless we reflect on our actions and change accordingly, the consequences of no action will be far more severe. Thanks very much.